Welcome to Lunch Break from the newsroom of the Ann Arbor News. I'm Stephanie Murray, and today I'm joined by Greg Stayskull, who's an Ann Arbor resident and a retired 31-year veteran of the FBI. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
Well, you're welcome.
Greg is here to talk about the scandal involving steroids in Major League Baseball. Hearings began this week on Capitol Hill probing what some say has become the pervasive use of steroids among Major League Baseball players. But Greg knew about steroids back in 1994, and he alerted Major League Baseball back then, but was ignored. And 14 years later, it's finally the focus of congressional hearings and a lot of public attention, too. So, Greg, I hope that you could start by telling us a little bit about how you got involved in investigating steroids and the investigation that you led on behalf of the FBI.
Sure. It's actually kind of a quintessential Ann Arbor story. I was involved in making presentations to the University of Michigan football team by invitation of Bo Schembechler started back in 1982. Excuse me, these presentations involved primarily gambling, sports bribery, that sort of thing. But I developed a little bit of a friendship with Bo, and in 1989 he called me over to his office, and he and Mike Gittleson. Mike was then the strength coach for the University of Michigan football team, and they talked to me about their concerns about steroids, not only football players, but also that they were seeing evidence that they were being used by young kids who wanted to go into Division I football.
1989.
1989. About the same time, it was made a federal felony to possess or traffic anabolic steroids. So, Bo's question to me was, who's doing anything about this? Is it being pursued? Is it being enforced? And I said, I really don't know the answer to that. I went back, researched the issue, and determined that it really wasn't being addressed. There was really no efforts by any of the agencies that had jurisdiction to do anything. So. I proposed to the FBI that we start up an undercover operation and traffic anabolic steroids into the black market, the traffic of anabolic steroids. And so that's how the whole thing started. And the case was meant to be a local case. We were just going to concentrate on Michigan. But it ended up, after it lasted about 3 years, I used 2 undercover agents. And we ended up going all over the United States, Mexico and Canada, did a lot of work with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties. Wow. And we ended up convicting over 70 people of trafficking anabolic steroids. Now, we only concentrated on the dealers. We didn't go after users. And we were trying to have as much impact on the black market as we could.
On the source of the steroid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so consequently, we had evidence of users in Major League Baseball, a lot of bodybuilders, and other sports as well, college football, obviously. And but again, we went after the dealers. But one of the dealers that we identified and prosecuted turned out to be the supplier for Jose Canseco and several other Major League Baseball players.
Was the proof that they were using it pretty solid back then?
Well, the dealer that we were the dealer that we prosecuted and then ultimately who cooperated with us, all of the information he provided to us turned out to be truthful. We actually identified and prosecuted several other dealers based on his information. And he had proof that he had a relationship with Canseco and other baseball players. And so, yes, I think it was pretty solid information, and it has turned out to be solid information. I mean, since then, obviously, Canseco has admitted that he was a steroid user at that time.
And so when you told the head of security for Major League Baseball about this, why do you think nothing happened? And did you ever consider going to someone higher?
Well, that occurred we were actually having a meeting, a conference at Quantico at the FBI Academy, and it involved these presentations that I talked about that we did for the football team. We also did them for other professional sports and other college teams. And we were meeting at a conference. Kevin Hallinan was there to represent Major League Baseball. And dealing with some of the issues that we dealt with in the presentations.
And Kevin Hallinan was the head of security.
For Major League Baseball, correct. And so Kevin and I struck up a conversation at a social time during that conference, and among other things, I talked about that, my steroid case and the fact that we knew that there were Major League Baseball players that were using steroids. Kevin indicated that, they had some knowledge of that. They had anecdotal information to that effect, but he said, we just had the players strike. The players don't want to do testing. There's really not much we can do about it. And well, I suggested to him that we would be willing to pursue it if they would, and he said, well, I'll get back to you, or something to that effect. And he never really did. We spoke again a few years later when I introduced Wenzloff to them. Wenzloff was the dealer that had identified Conseco as being one of his customers. And ultimately I put Wenzloff and Major League Baseball together. That was in 2002, I believe.
But then Kevin, from the head of security, later in the Mitchell report denied. He doesn't remember that conversation.
Well, that was his initial.
Was that frustrating for you?
Well, yeah, it was very frustrating. But and he also said that he didn't know who I was, which was, I think Kevin was probably under some pressure at the time. It was obviously disingenuous on his part, because ultimately they had to admit that we had had this conversation in 2002 when I set them up, when I had them meet Wenzloff. But in addition to that, I had other conversations with Kevin on other topics. One instance was when I talked to him about organized crime. So for Kevin to say that not only that we had never had this conversation, but that he didn't know who I was obviously not true.
Two more questions for you.
Sure.
How do you feel today about the hearings going on and the fact that this is finally being looked at? And do you think that from the time that you investigated back in the 90s till now, do you think that steroid use has gotten worse?
Well, I think it has gotten worse in certain areas. Certainly, I think the steroid problem became worse in Major League Baseball. Steroids became pervasive in Major League Baseball, I think, because players knew that players that were using them obviously were having some success. I mean, steroids will work in the short run to make you bigger and stronger, faster. And players saw that and realized that it was giving other players a competitive advantage. So they were put in a situation, some players were put in a situation where they felt that they had to use steroids to become competitive or to become more competitive. And consequently, I think the problem got worse because it wasn't addressed back in 1994. And I think that that's true of in a lot of areas. Now, on the other hand, I think college football, the situation actually got better. They addressed the issue, they did more testing, and I think they educated the players more. The problem now with steroids are that they are readily available over the internet, and a lot of the stuff that is being sold over the internet is not real. The quality control is bad. The raw materials are coming out of China, and Chinese people, their quality control is bad when they're making toys. You can only imagine what it's like for prescription drugs. But at any rate, so that's a problem, and that also is going to have to be addressed. So I guess you can say that in some ways it's gotten better, in some ways it's gotten worse.
Now, will you testify on Capitol Hill?
If I were asked to testify.
You haven't been asked?
I have not been asked.
Okay. Last question then. What is your opinion on Bud Selig and his culpability here? And this week he just announced that his contract as commissioner of Major League Baseball has been extended for another 3 years.
Well, I think Bud Selig is making now a good faith effort to address this issue, and there are a lot of political considerations. They had to ultimately get cooperation from the players' union to do the testing and some of those things. But that being said, I think that there was. Selig was in a position, the entire commissioner's office was in a position where they had to know that there was a problem, and I think they felt that at that time the only course they had was to ignore it. But unfortunately, that was not. Ultimately, that was not in the best interest of baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg, for joining us today.
Oh, you're
welcome. Thank you for all your insight. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us during lunch break from the newsroom of the Ann Arbor News. I'm Stephanie Murray.